This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome. Welcome to the September monthly partnership meeting of the Southeast and Caribbean Disaster Resilience Partnership. My name is Heather McCarthy, and I am your new Executive Director. I am speaking to you today from sunny Jacksonville, Florida. The Southeast and Caribbean Disaster Resilience Partnership seeks to strengthen community resilience and support rapid recovery from storms and disasters in communities throughout North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and the Caribbean territories and nations. We aspire to be the primary network in our region for professionals in emergency management, climate adaptation, and disaster recovery. As of this morning, we have 432 participants, and we are growing every day. And today I'd like to welcome our new members, and a special thanks to our newest supporting partner member, Martin County, Florida. Thank you, Martin County Board of County Commissioners. Today, we also send special well wishes to our partners in Puerto Rico and other regions who are still without power and running water due to Hurricane Fiona. And now I would like to turn the floor over to the chair of our advisory board, Lindy Betzold. Lindy is with Linker and the NOAA Office for Coastal Management, and Lindy will introduce our super speakers for today. So Lindy, over to you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, all, and appreciate that welcome, Heather. My name is Lindy Betzold, and I support the NOAA Office for Coastal Management as a coastal management specialist. Our office works with state coastal zone management programs and national estuarine research reserves, and both have extensive policy, research, and education responsibilities in the field of resilience. And more broadly, our office works with a variety of partners from all sectors to deliver the products and services and programs most needed by the nation's coastal zone management communities. SCDRP and NOAA are co-hosting today's webinar because this topic is so important to both groups, and since coastal management in the Southeast and Caribbean has been a founding force and an engaged participant since day one of the SCDRP. Today's topic is a great example of coastal management programs working to identify and prioritize resilience projects and actively supporting resilience activities with state and federal funding. The North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality's Coastal Management Program has built a cutting-edge community resilience program at the state level. This group learned from the experiences with resilience planning in Georgia and Florida coastal management programs and other sources to inform their program. They've also partnered with North Carolina's Office of Recovery and Resilience to offer resilience planning statewide and bring additional resources to the coast. Our intent in offering this webinar is that other groups and programs can learn from North Carolina's experience to help shape their own resilience efforts. It's my pleasure to introduce Mackenzie Todd with the North Carolina Division of Coastal Management and Brian Byfield from the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resilience. Mackenzie is a coastal resilience specialist with the North Carolina Division of Coastal Management. She's been working on the new North Carolina Resilient Coastal Communities program since 2020. She received her bachelor's in environmental science and a master's in coastal and ocean policy from UNC Wilmington, and she previously worked as a town planner and community rating system coordinator for the town of Morehead City. Brian is an urban regional planner with more than 25 years experience with projects in more than 60 counties, most of which are in North Carolina. Currently, the Resilient Coastal Communities program for NCORE, and he has served in several roles across resilience and sustainability, land use and transportation infrastructure development, private sector, and government. He always advocates for underrepresented communities having an effective seat at the table before discussions begin. He completed his master's in city and regional planning at UNC Chapel Hill and has his bachelor's in environmental resource development and regional planning from the University of Technology in Jamaica. I'd like to ask the folks please hold questions until the end of the presentations, and you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of both Mackenzie and Brian. You can put them in the chat box so you don't forget them, and I'll call on you to share your questions during the question and answer session. Please remember to mute your mic when you are not speaking. At this time, I am going to turn it over to Mackenzie, and I'm going to share her presentation.
Hey, thank you, Lindy. Good morning, everybody. While Lindy's pulling that up. As she mentioned, my name is Mackenzie Todd. I'm the Coastal Resilience Specialist for the North Carolina Division of Coastal Management. And I'm really excited to be here this morning and talk about this new program. This is pretty much a dream job for me. So this has been a pretty exciting 2 years. And we're also joined this morning with our new resiliency coordinator in our office. Krista Early is here with us. So say a little shout out to her. So I'll go ahead and get us started here. The Resilient Coastal Communities Program, we call it RCCP for short, and I'll probably use that in this presentation, is really a continuation of coastal resilience efforts in the state over the last several years. Next slide, please, Lindy. So beginning after Hurricane Matthew in 2016, DCM, the Division for Coastal Management, piloted a coastal resilience program called RENA, which stands for the Resilience Evaluation and Needs Assessment, in which 5 communities, including Duck, Edenton, Hatteras Village, Oriental, and Pine Knoll Shores, participated and began assessing their physical and social vulnerabilities to coastal hazards. Through the RENA process, DCM and its partners worked with local governments to map community assets, engage and educate the public, identify their social and physical vulnerabilities, and explore potential projects to mitigate future impacts from flooding, sea level rise, and other extreme weather events. This process led to a number of positive outcomes, including a more localized understanding of the impact of hazards on important community assets, increased public engagement in the resilience planning process, and additional data to include in grant applications for implementing those identified projects. Next slide, please. After Hurricane Florence hit in 2018, DCM developed a couple more resources for local governments to start really addressing these impacts. Those included the Coastal Adaptation and Resiliency website, as well as the North Carolina Coastal Community Resiliency Guide. In addition, Governor Cooper issued Executive Order 80, which called for the development of the 2020 Climate Risk Assessment and Resilience Plan, which in that plan called for the larger umbrella program, the Resilient Communities Program, which Brian will be speaking about next. Next slide, please. Executive Order 80 also called for regional resilience workshops to gather feedback from local governments and the development of the North Carolina Climate Risk Assessment and Resilience Plan. 2 of those workshops our office, DCM, organized and hosted back in 2019. These workshops gave us critical feedback directly from our communities about what their needs are and how we as the state can support them. Some of the key takeaways from those workshops were that impacts on communities are being seen and felt more so than ever. There's a need for a holistic, forward-looking approach to build resilience in North Carolina. And then ultimately, we realized as a state, we did not have many shovel-ready projects to compete for all those federal funds. So having a planning process makes us more set up to apply for those federal grant funds. Next slide, please. So to begin developing and implementing the Resilient Coastal Communities Program, DCM received approximately $830,000 in funding from the North Carolina General Assembly and $1.1 million from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's Emergency Coastal Resilience Fund. So we are proud to launch the RCCP, which is the first of its kind in the state, and it's modeled after successful programs in other coastal states, which might be online with us today, such as the Massachusetts Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program and Storm Smart Coast Program, Rhode Island's Resilience Program, and also Florida's. Next slide, please. So critical to the RCCP has been our program partners. Firstly, the Office of Recovery and Resiliency, which Brian is at, the Nature Conservancy, and the North Carolina Sea Grant. All of the folks in those teams have been on our steering committee and alongside us from the very beginning. They offer staff support, guidance, and expertise on implementing the program. And a handful of our partners have also served as ex officio members on multiple community action teams, which I'll speak about in a minute, during the first 2 phases of the program. And they've also been instrumental in helping our office in the program evaluation process. So none of this would really be possible without them. Next slide, please. So the RCCP is designed to address barriers to coastal resilience at the local level. We want to assist communities with risk and vulnerability assessments and develop portfolios of well-planned and prioritized projects. And then hopefully advancing those priority projects to a shovel-ready status, and then linking communities to funding streams for project implementation. Next slide, please. The geographic scope of our program is specific to the 20 coastal CAMA counties, which lie within the jurisdiction of the Division of Coastal Management. So all counties and municipalities within our CAMA jurisdiction are eligible to apply for the program. Next slide, please. So there are 4 phases to this program. Phase 1 includes performing a risk and vulnerability assessment, developing a community action team, and engaging with the public. Phase 2 of the program involves a community and data-driven process to identify priority actions that can be taken to adapt to short and long-term hazards. Phase 3 is the engineering and design and hopefully permitting of those prioritized projects. We'll make grants available for communities who have successfully completed phases 1 and 2 to develop those projects to shovel-ready status. And then phase 4 is the implementation phase. So once communities complete phases 1, 2, and 3, they're eligible for phase 4 funds to get that project on the ground. Next slide, please. Thank you. So DCM staff, it was 2 or 3 of us at the time, wrote the program planning handbook, which is designed to provide guidance to contractors and local governments in completing the first 2 phases of the program. The program steps are outlined, and important existing data, tools, and resources are incorporated throughout the document. This handbook can also help communities that might be completing the work of phases 1 and 2 themselves to prepare them to apply for phases 3 and 4. DCM staff also created 2 separate requests for applications, RFAs, for this first 2 phases. So one was for eligible communities, and then one was for contractors who would provide that technical assistance. Next slide, please. So for the first round of phases 1 and 2, we received 30 applications representing 32 coastal communities. Our office reviewed the community applications with our program partners last year. An application was scored across 7 criteria, including their level of risk exposure to vulnerable populations and critical assets, their economic status and need, their internal capacity, and their momentum with related efforts. So ultimately 26 communities were selected, including 18 municipalities and 8 counties. And we also selected 10 contractors, which are listed on the map to the left on that screen. 10 contractors were hired to provide the technical assistance, and we matched them with our participating communities. So as you can see, there's a range of communities that were selected, many just beginning the resilience process and conversation, and then others with some existing work to build upon. So we received 20 applications from interested contractors, and as I mentioned, 10 were selected. Applications were scored for contractors based on their experience in resilience planning, community engagement, nature-based solutions, and any relevant work experience on the North Carolina coast. So this map illustrates the participating communities and their assigned contractors. So our office contracted directly with the contracting firms that provided the technical assistance, and this kind of lessened the procurement burden on local governments, which we heard was a pro for them. So Dewberry was matched with Cape Carteret, Craven County, Pine Knoll Shores, and Swansboro. Kinley Horn was with Hyde County, specifically Ocracoke, Pamlico County, and Vandermeer. Kleinfelder had Topsail Island, and all 3 of those communities came into this process together. So it was Topsail Beach, North Topsail Beach, and Silver City. Moffett and Nickel had Leland, Navassa, and Sunset Beach. RK&K was matched with the local COG, the Mideast Commission, and they had Aurora, Beaufort County, Belhaven, and Washington. SWCA Environmental Consultants had Bertie County, Hertford County, and Windsor. BHB had Duck and Nags Head. And then finally, Withers Ravenel had Currituck and Dare counties. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, 4 phases to the program, but the first phase has 6 steps. So the first step is to develop an inclusive and diverse community action team whose role is to actively participate in and inform the process and champion the effort for each participating community. Members can include locality staff, so anyone in planning, public works, soil and water, emergency management, elected officials, planning board members, any resilience experts, business community leaders, faith community leaders, protected land managers, basically just anyone interested in starting that conversation. The second step is to set the vision and goals. Specific measurable goals will help the community identify steps that can be taken to achieve the vision. So we are asking communities to use the triple bottom line approach, which goes beyond traditional hazard mitigation and disaster recovery to develop a holistic strategy considering social, environmental, and economic factors. The third step is to review their existing local plans and efforts. We want to make sure we're promoting integration throughout the project development process, and a lot of existing plans that communities have should be considered and pulled from to inform the project development, such as regional and local plans, their ordinances, non-regulatory programs. And so the fourth step is to develop a community engagement strategy. So getting from resilience planning to action requires jointly created ideas, buy-in, and commitment from a diverse group of stakeholders. Inclusivity in the process, particularly by involving vulnerable and historically underrepresented members of the community, is key to account for a diverse range of community perspectives. The fifth step is to map their critical assets and natural infrastructure. So the community action team helps the contractor select those critical assets and natural infrastructure to include within the risk and vulnerability assessment, which is the last step. So the risk and vulnerability assessment helps evaluate the risks to a community's vulnerable populations and critical assets from a number of coastal and climate hazards. So we ask them to look at flooding, specifically rainfall, tidal, and riverine, storm surge, sea level rise, and then any other locally relevant hazards such as erosion and wind. Next slide, please. So the second phase is the good stuff. This is what the communities really liked. It includes the project identification and prioritization. So communities develop a portfolio of resilience projects and actions aimed at reducing their exposure and sensitivity to those hazards, as well as strengthening their adaptive capacity of their community assets and those vulnerable populations. They then consolidate that list into at least 5 priority projects that get organized into a portfolio. Next slide, please. So the first round of phases 1 and 2 was very rewarding for me as a staff person. I had the opportunity to travel to almost all 26 communities up and down the coast. So I had the pleasure of meeting with very invested community members who have been trying to make a difference in their communities. And however, due to the pandemic, community engagement didn't turn out exactly as we planned. However, the communities made it work. Some still held in-person meetings that were socially distanced. Some only held virtual. And then some provided hybrid options where you could do a virtual option or you could meet in person. Some of our contractors also got creative and conducted community engagement during events that the communities were already having. So for example, the town of Cape Carteret was having a fall festival last year, which they said a lot of the community members attend every year. So their contractor set up a booth at the festival and was able to speak to a wide range of community members passing through about the RCCP, about Cape Carteret's hazards, and gave them an opportunity to point out critical assets that might have been missed or areas of flooding that were not mapped. So that really helped get the word out and helped lead to a lot of their project ideas. Next slide, please. So the main deliverable for phases 1 and 2 is what we're calling a resilience strategy. So this is consisting of a combination of those deliverables developed throughout the process, as I mentioned. So their vision and goals, their community action team, their stakeholder engagement. And while this is not meant to be a comprehensive resilience plan, the information and the strategy may later be used to develop a comprehensive resilience plan or be integrated into existing local plans and ordinances. So having a planning document like this helps to provide a clarity of purpose, attract funding, and then provide a more direct path to implementation. Next slide, please. So the town of Hertford was one of our 26 participating communities, and they were also funded for Phase 3 engineering and design funds. So Hertford was matched with SWCA environmental consultants who provided the technical assistance to complete the work of phases 1 and 2. Hertford is located in Perquimans County, and they have a population of 2,126 people, according to the 2020 census. And they're approximately 2.88 square miles. So the town had a very dedicated community action team. I was able to attend 2 or 3 of their meetings in person. And that team really helped lead the process, which led them to being awarded Phase 3 funds. So the town and SWCA held several in-person meetings, like I mentioned, where residents could come and see the maps that SWCA made, excuse me, illustrating their different hazards, and then it provided them an opportunity to provide feedback and input, which was very valuable to the contractor. So for Phase 3, the town plans to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of the flow dynamics in an area called Jenny's Gut, and associated drainage structures to identify areas where flow needs to be increased or decreased to minimize their flood risks. They also plan to investigate the impact of the railroad potentially holding back water, and then looking at any need for water retention or watershed improvements in upstream areas. The project will evaluate the potential to employ nature-based solutions to help retain water on the landscape and help absorb water to prevent flooding in the low-lying areas. Jenny's Gut Drainage Improvement Feasibility Study was ranked first in their project portfolio, excuse me, and they were awarded $45,000 to help complete that study. Next slide, please. Beaufort County was another one of our participating communities, and they were funded for Phase 3 engineering and design work too. So Beaufort County was matched with RK&K and their local COG, the Mideast Commission, and they all worked together to provide the technical assistance for phases 1 and 2. Beaufort County has a population of 44,652 people, and they're approximately 950 square miles. So for Phase 3, the county is planning to construct a low-impact development demonstration site on the county's community college, which is pretty interesting. So this hybrid solution will be combined with the development of educational materials for developers and homeowners to learn about different nature-based and hybrid options that can be implemented on future residential or commercial projects, ultimately reducing stormwater runoff, which they had a lot of issues with. The site will also include a bioretention cell, a rain garden, pervious parking spaces, and water diversion techniques that will be accompanied by on-site educational signs. So this project will be an effort to familiarize and educate the community with these low-impact development options. And the project also complements the constructed stormwater wetlands developed on campus by Sound Rivers. So the county received $64,130 to complete the engineering and design work for this site. Next slide, please. So moving on to lessons learned, lots of those. Our office surveyed our participating communities and contractors during this first round, and we learned that I'll start with some good things. The first 2 phases somewhat forced communities to go through a resilience planning process, which they hadn't done before, and it showcased some growing pains from the usual hazard mitigation planning process. A handful of the contractors created their own templates, story maps, and processes different or missing from our program planning handbook, which was really awesome. The communities also mentioned how they enjoyed the community action teams and how they plan to use them in the future. And then we also found that, like I said, partnering contracting firms with the community's local council of government can be very successful. So, you have a contracting firm that may not be familiar with the area, and then you match them with a COG, and it helps build trust in the community because they know that local planner, and they can kind of help with the community engagement process. Let's see, so almost all of our communities from phases 1 and 2 applied for Phase 3 funding, so that was a pro, and they plan to use deliverables for future funding opportunities. So during our evaluation process, we identified areas for improvement for our next round. So I'll just go through a couple of those. Firstly, we found a need to decide whether to fund less communities with a higher budget or fund more communities with a smaller budget. Participating counties may need to specify an area of interest. Our budget was not enough for a whole county-wide assessment, and the county-wide community engagement was very challenging. Our office may need to be more hands-on in the community action team development phase and help connect communities with other agencies and NGOs. And we should be able to do that next time as we've got some more staff coming in. That was just me and my supervisor at the time, so a little shorthanded. We also need to provide education on resilience planning and how it's different from hazard mitigation planning. We don't want to regurgitate existing hazard mitigation plans and data. We need to advise communities to review their existing plans and efforts maybe before setting their visions and goals, so maybe switching those steps. Provide some training materials for communities and contractors on meaningful and successful community engagement. Possibly require a minimum list of critical assets that they have to assess and map, specifically natural infrastructure. We let the communities pick their critical assets this first round. However, some communities didn't include things like roads, rivers, wetlands, water and sewer lines, and then some did. So there were some differences in equity there, but that would have been beneficial to assess. So maybe we just have at least 5 that they need to include and map. We also want to add a next step section in the planning handbook at the end that provides some guidance after phases 1 and 2. You know, you've got this portfolio of projects, what can you do? Where to look for funding, what other assessments might need to be done to get that one project to the next step. And then finally, we also are looking to create a technical appendix that Krista's helping me on that's going to hopefully include templates that some of those contractors created as examples for some of those different steps. And then including a more robust list of data sources for them to reference. Next slide, please. So where is the program today? We're currently wrapping up contracting for phase 3 awards, like I mentioned. And once communities have an executed contract with the state, they can begin their procurement process. So a total of 20 projects were awarded for a total grant award amount of $1.12 million. And staff is currently working to take those lessons learned from the first round and make those necessary improvements, especially to our handbook, the scopes of work, and then just how we're going to run the program next time. Applications for the second round of phases 1 and 2, once we get those adjustments made, are expected to be released later this fall. And then applications for phase 4, which is what the communities are very excited about, is the implementation phase. That's expected to be released maybe at the end of the year into early next year, once communities are kind of starting to wrap up phase 3 work. Next slide, please. So as I just mentioned, we're at the beginning of phase 3. So 20 projects representing 22 communities were awarded. And the 22 communities, as I mentioned, Topsail Island with North Topsail Beach, and Surf City, they came together again for phase 3 funding. So they've decided that working together was better than splitting off, which has been really interesting. And funding phase 3, DCM staff, we were looking at projects that were expected to increase local resilience and then meet the visions and goals set out in their local resilience strategy. So applications were scored based on if the community had completed phases 1 and 2, if the project's contribution helped towards the objectives of the RCCP. We looked at the project's alignment with the community's resilience strategy. If the project can produce engineering and design plans for a shovel-ready project or a final draft of a developed ordinance or policy. We were looking at projects that incorporate nature-based components, projects that ensure equitable consideration of socially vulnerable and historically disadvantaged and underserved populations, potential transferability of the project to other coastal areas, because we're all learning from each other. So if it's something that other areas could be doing, that was scored well. Availability of additional funds required to complete the project, the size and scope of expected benefits, and then their cost effectiveness. So a handful of the communities have received their executed contracts with the state. Some of those came through this morning. And so that means now they can start their procurement process. So we should start seeing some of those RFPs posted here soon. The final deliverables for this round are going to range. It's not going to be a resilience strategy like the first 2 phases. Engineering design projects will require engineered site plans that are ready for submittal to permitting agencies. So just getting them one step closer. If it's an ordinance or policy, we're looking for a final draft document that will be ready for council. And then we expect phase 3 to reach completion later this next spring. And then, as I mentioned, phase 4 will begin. Next slide, please. And that's it. So that's my information there. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I love talking to new folks, and I can answer any questions here at the end. I'll pass it to Brian.
Thank you, Mackenzie. I'll just wait a couple seconds for Lindy to put up my slides. But again, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you this morning about Rise out of NCORE. Everybody hearing me well? Okay. Yeah, so RISE, Regions Innovating for Strong Economies and the Environment, is a program out of the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. We work very closely with the RCCP program that the Division of Coastal Management is doing, and I'll quickly go through and show you some highlights on the similarities and the differences in the program. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview of what NCORE is. NCORE is 4 years old. It's a state office based in the Department of Public Safety, focused obviously on recovery and resiliency. We want to make North Carolina a leader in this field. We help with coordinating resiliency efforts across the different entities at the different levels and the different types of organizations. We provide expertise and technical support and help with the implementation of activity. NCORE came about as a result of the repeated storms that North Carolina was experiencing and the need to do something about them to ameliorate the effects or to prevent the level of damage that was being wrought by these storms. Next slide, please. So RISE is a program that covers the eastern half of North Carolina, funded out of the Economic Development Administration, again related to storms Matthew and Michael in particular. And we decided to work in 9 regions across the eastern half, roughly following the boundaries of the councils of government. There's a point at which we thought about doing watersheds. Very academically correct, but administratively very difficult to do. Several counties, even more municipalities, different organizations, and so on. So we felt that for the purposes of RISE and the time frame in which this project was being done, that the council of government boundaries were the most appropriate. You can click on to the next slide, please. So what we ended up doing, we issued an RFP that we had developed and asked for vendors / consultants to help us work through the technical aspects of doing this, understanding the vulnerability assessment, and then moving on to developing a portfolio of projects. You'll see here we ended up hiring 3 contractors across the different geographies. We felt it best that, for those in the red region, we would put all of them with one contractor, so that they're dealing with issues that are similar. So we ended up with, like I said, with 3 working through different aspects. So you can click on to the next slide, please. So what's the difference or similarities between RCCP and RISE? We are primarily doing the same type of work, but at different scales. So RISE is focused on regional resiliency. What can we do at a level across the entire COG, which includes multiple counties? Some COGs are as big as 10 counties. So what can we do at this scale to impact resilient outcomes? And that sort of is the main difference between what we're doing here at RISE and RCCP. Like Mackenzie said, we sit on each other's teams and we help and improve and we learn from them. The RCCP is a few months ahead of us, so we're taking their lessons and applying where appropriate to us. Sort of one of the other big differences has to do with the involvement of the North Carolina Rural Center with our program, and I will highlight that in a little bit going forward. So you can click to the next slide, please. So RISE has three components. Leadership training, which we do in concert with the Rural Center. They have a program. They have a program for over 40 years where they're working on developing capacity and leadership training in North Carolina, and we've piggybacked with them. We had 5 different training sessions across the entire region, um, training folks in what they do, what the Rural Center does, but also adding a component of resiliency. And we've been able to garner some new advocates for resiliency in this regard. We are also, NCORE is also developing a community guide, a North Carolina Resilient Communities Guide for the entire state, which will help communities, whether small or large, develop a process for doing resilience planning. And we hope to have that out by the end of this year. And what we were talking about RISE before has to do with the regional resiliency portfolios. What RISE is asking folks to do in these regions is to develop a vulnerability assessment, and from that vulnerability assessment, develop a set of projects that begin to address some of the issues that you found in the vulnerability assessment. We are currently at the point where we have just about finished all the vulnerability assessments, and some of them are now out for public comment. And then we're moving into the phase of developing the projects. And one of the most important pieces of the projects has to do with implementation pathways, not just project ideas, but how do we get these projects from idea to execution. And I just want to pause here for a moment to mention that when we talk about projects, we're not only talking about construction, underground, shovel-ready projects, but projects maybe communication, education, and so on, and policy change, ordinance changes, and so on. So we want to think about resilience in a very comprehensive manner. Next slide, please. So yes, we do technical analysis, and what we're trying to do at the end of the day is to have vulnerability assessments that can be used for resiliency planning or any other type of planning in the region. And they will serve as important tools in developing, whether it's your CIP or whatever. One of the things that we have found is that some regions do not have the capability or the staff to undertake some of this assessment. So what we have developed will be very valuable for them to use in doing other types of planning. Next slide, please. So what are the elements of interest that have come up so far in executing this RISE program? Regionalism versus parochialism. We are so used to working for our municipality, our county. So asking many of the regions to think globally, to think beyond their boundaries, has been a learning experience, new for some, and we're overcoming some of the past issues that have prevented this cooperation. One of the other things that we are focused on is getting folks to think about resiliency, changing to a resiliency mindset versus just a purely recovery mindset. And that's been better in some places than others. And I mentioned the Rural Center, working with the Rural Center. I want to add also that what we did, we had local facilitators who live and work in the regions be part of a stakeholder partnership team, similar to the CAT that Mackenzie described in their region, but for this larger geography. And the local facilitators were the bridge between local input, the state's input, and what the uh, technical assistance providers, the vendors, were able to provide. We've had some teething pains, lessons learned, things that we can do better the next time, things that we want to improve on for sure. But I will take those in questions if you have any specifics. Can you go to the next slide, please? So yes, Linda, you may need to click through about 4 or 5 times to get this. Okay. So one of the things that the problems that we have had is stakeholder identification and maintenance of participation. Oh, this is a great idea. These are the different groups that we identified, whether it's farming, political partnerships, religious groups, emergency services, those with different language barriers. So one of the things is it's pretty hard to get them on board initially, but then it's even harder to keep them interested over the long term. So that's sort of one of the issues that we have to think about when we hopefully do phase 2 across the rise 2 across the rest of the state. Can you click on to the next slide? So that was a quick overview of what we do, and I'll take questions. Again, my name is Brian Byfield, Resilient Communities Program Manager at NCORE, and you can see the contact information for everybody else there.
Thank you very much, Mackenzie and Brian, for those great presentations. I'm going to pull from the chat box on questions, and Vamsi, if you'd like to come on camera and mic and ask your question. Seems like you had a couple questions. In the interest of time, if you could choose 2 of your questions, I think a few of the other ones may have gotten answered in the remainder of the presentations. But if there are any lingering questions, please feel free to share those at this time.
Thank you, Lindy. Great talks, Mackenzie and Brian. I'm very glad to make your acquaintance. So I guess in the interest of time, I just want to ask, what is the current status of these programs in terms of objectives that are yet to be filled and wish lists of things that you would like to see going forward? And how do you see contractors such as Tetra Tech and some of the other ones that you named being a part of this process?
Mackenzie, you want to grab that, or do you want me to?
How about you start?
Okay. Yeah. So if I start at the end where you're talking about contractors, the vendors, contractors, consultants, whatever you call them, are going to be an important part of this process going forward, irrespective of at the regional scale or the more local scale that Mackenzie and her team is doing, because we don't have the bodies and capacity within our own organizations to do all the work. So they will definitely be part of that. How they are going forward, how they're involved may change a little bit, but there is no way that we can do this work without them.
Yeah, and I'll add on to what Brian said. In terms of how we selected our contractors for the first 2 phases, like I mentioned, we looked at their relevant planning experience. We had a lot of firms apply that were strictly engineering, which is great for the next phases. But the first 2, we really wanted firms that have planning experience. Looking at nature-based solutions, because that is something with our NIFWIF funding that we're required to have some nature-based solutions in there. And then kind of looking at their work on the coast, because the coastal communities are very unique. And so, like I said, we selected them and we matched them with the communities. That matching process, we took the communities' request into account. So some communities requested, let's just say Dewberry, and so we matched them with them. And then some had no preference, so we just matched them with one of our contractors, and then now some of them have created pretty good relationships moving forward.
Yeah, our process was a little different in the sense that we did an RFP and folks, the companies responded, and we chose and we tried to match them with the regions more directly, a little different than what Mackenzie did, but essentially the same broad process.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for your question. Jackie Jackson had a similar question. Are there any other questions that you'd like to ask Jackie? I think she also wanted to know a rough dollar amount for the project and what if there was a local match. So,
Yeah, and this may be diving too far into, I feel like maybe I should have an offline conversation with Mackenzie because I'm really looking at similar efforts for Chatham County, Georgia. But I was curious exactly kind of what you just mentioned. How come you guys chose to not just go with one consultant through a similar RFP process or whatnot, and instead chose multiple, and then kind of getting into the weeds a little bit? And I apologize if I missed it, but what was your uh, dollar amount for the project within each individual community?
Yes,
And that,
thank you. I did forget to mention that. So each community was awarded about $30,000. And there were 4 communities that only got 15,000 because they had already done a lot of that phase one work. But that money, didn't really go straight to them. It went to the contractors because we
sure.
contracted directly with them, but they were awarded, so we know it's a very low budget. So we're hoping we can increase that next time. And then what was the other part, the contractors?
Well, just why y'all chose multiple consultants?
I think that's because we weren't sure that one firm could handle 26 different resilience strategies. Maybe one could one day, but we kind of wanted to spread that work out evenly, so each community was getting the time and attention, hopefully it deserved. But I would be happy to talk with you offline
Okay.
if you want to talk more about it. I could talk about this stuff.
No, I appreciate it. We're definitely looking at similar efforts. So I was very curious in your process up front. So thank you.
Thank you.
great, we've got time for 2 more quick questions. I'm going to go to Kayla Breland, followed by Jordana. So Kayla, if you want to come off mute and talk a little bit about the difference between hazard mitigation planning and the resilience planning and what that difference is.
Yeah, I was just curious, like as you kind of, looking towards the future and sort of sharing this initiative broadly, a lot of communities already do mitigation planning. So how would you sort of socialize that difference or how it can complement that if some of that work has already been done?
That's a great question. That's something internally we're trying to figure out, how to communicate that and how to educate folks on the differences between the two. And, I'm obviously not a hazard mitigation expert, but kind of what I meant by that in the presentation is that we don't want communities to just get another edition of their hazard mitigation plan. In resilience planning, we kind of wanted them to look more into the future conditions, looking into sea level rise, and then hoping to get some more creative project ideas. But if you have any insight on how to educate that, I would love to talk to you about that.
I don't know if I have the answer, but we can certainly tag up and
Yeah.
kind of sit down and maybe talk through it because I think it could really complement each other, like you said, without creating that additional work. Because as you know,
Yeah.
within your communities, that capacity is just the hard part.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel, but we also don't want to give them a deliverable that's just what they already have. So
Right.
yeah.
Perfect. Well,
Great.
I
Yes,
will
that
tag
plan
up.
alignment question sure is a tricky one that our office is struggling with too. So lots of people tackling that one. Good. Great. And last, I had a question about identifying vulnerable communities from Jordana. Would you like to share your question, Jordana?
I can go ahead and try to answer it for
Sure.
time,
Go
but
ahead.
that's a great question, and that is something that we really want to improve for the next time. So when we selected our 26 communities in terms of vulnerability, we looked at their economic tier status and then their CDC social vulnerability index. But there's so many other ways I think moving forward we can assess vulnerable populations, and we just don't have that yet. So that's something that we're working on.
Just to add to that, in the RISE program, we really made that a important piece of what the vendors were doing, GIS analysis, taking existing databases, looking at them together, where are the flooding areas, where are the populations over 65, where are the low income populations, and where we have a crossing of those three, for example, that became identified as a very vulnerable population or region that needed special attention and addressing for a project. So that's sort of one way we went at it, very technical. And then how do we fix that, or attempt to begin to fix that through our project?
Great. Thank you, Mackenzie and Brian, for your time today. And thank you to all of our participants. I'm going to pass it back over to Heather McCarthy to close us out.
Thank you, Lindy, and thank you, Mackenzie and Brian. Thank you. We're going to move on to just a few announcements, partnership news, what's new with SCDRP. So if you missed last month's presentation or you would like to share Mackenzie and Brian's inspiring presentation today with others, please visit our YouTube channel for the recorded video. Our program coordinator, Josephine Justin, will be uploading today's video probably tonight or tomorrow morning. And the link to our YouTube channel is found on our website at scdrpsocorro.org. Exciting news! The partnership is coming back together in person for the first time in 3 years. So mark your calendars, please. The SCDRP 2023 annual meeting is scheduled in Miami, Florida on Tuesday, January 24th and Wednesday, January 25th. We are in the final negotiations for the event to be held at the Novotel Miami Brickell Hotel. We have an active and engaged steering committee, and we're planning this year's theme and session topics, some field trips around Miami, and some exciting auxiliary gatherings both before and after our main meeting. So I look forward to seeing everyone in Miami. We are seeking sponsors for our annual meeting, and sponsorship funds each year are used to lower the cost of registration for attendees, to support conference-related expenses, and also to provide registration scholarships for students and other participants in need. We offer these 3 scholarship levels, the 5,000, the 2,500, and the 1,000 level sponsorship. And of course, each level has associated benefits and opportunities, including complimentary registrations. For the opportunity to become a sponsor will be available along with open registration. We plan to open the registration for our annual meeting on October 1st. And if you have any questions regarding invoicing or payment, please direct them to me, heather@socorro.org. Our next partnership meeting will be held on Thursday, October 27th from 10 to 11, and we are extremely honored and excited to have another super speaker from the Caribbean. We will hear from Tia Brown, who will share her experiences from Barbados. Tia is a meteorologist at the Barbados Meteorological Services. Please note the November and December monthly partnership meetings will be moved up 1 week to accommodate the holidays. So they will be held on November 17th and December 15th. Same place, same time. And we typically love to hear from you at this time. We like to hear what's going on. Resources, funding, webinars, any recent publications or studies, news highlights, etc. Today, we're running out of time. So I'm going to ask you to please send those resources and updates from your organization's work or research to our general email account, which is scdrp@socorro.org, and we will share those resources in our next newsletter. Lastly, a special thank you to our super speakers today, Mackenzie Todd and Brian Byfield, for sharing with us their inspirational resilience work in North Carolina. A special thank you to Lindy Betzold for organizing and facilitating today's presentations. And a big thank you to you for joining us today and your continued contributions to the Southeast and Caribbean Disaster Resilience Partnership. Thank you again, and have a great day.